Jack and where he's coming from and how he's come to be here. I've been given the task of welcoming him here today, and it's a real pleasure to be able to do that. Jack was formerly at the University of Bath in the education faculty, but has been an adjunct professor here for the past year. His main role is to contribute to the development of the EdD programme, which is the professional doctorate that we have here, and to work with myself and others in the development of the Centre for the Child and Family, which we're really enjoying to become a major research institute within the university. Jack has a national and international reputation. During the past year, he has been invited to do keynote presentations and a lecture tour in 10 countries, including South Africa, America, the Czech Republic, China, to name but a few. He has also supervised the successful completion over 30 PhD doctorates. He has had published more articles than I care to think in peer-reviewed publications, and he has just this year alone co-written 3 books. Am I accurate in that? That's correct. He is a former president of BERA, the British Education Research Association. What I'd really like to do is just welcome Jack today in his presentation to us in terms of his approach to research. Thank you, Jack.
Yes, thank you, Jo. Many thanks, Jo, for that introduction, and to Chris as well. And also to Sue for inviting me for this foundation hour, because it's a real pleasure and a genuine privilege to come and share ideas in terms of my own 40-year research programme into educational theory. And I'm just conscious it's quite a large room, and is it okay at the back in terms of just the sound? That's okay, so that's fine, that's great. Now, what I was wanting to do was to look at the Faculty of Education here in terms of its vision and purpose, and then link the values in the faculty to my own research programme, because I've become known internationally for the idea that each individual can generate what I call their living educational theory. And what it means is that rather than thinking just of educational theory as the theories of others, in terms of those grand narratives and the conceptual frameworks that we're all used to, whether it's Brunner or Piaget or Vygotsky, that each person in this room, in my view, has got an enormous depth and range of what I call embodied knowledge. The knowledge that you bring into your professional practice, and that continues to motivate you through your values in terms of why you continue to do what you do, why you continue to try to improve the quality of your influence over time. And I call the explanations that individuals give for this educational influence in learning their living educational theory. And it's a very different form of theory to the ones that I'm used to in terms of the philosophy, psychology, sociology, history, theology, economics of education. So that is the central idea that, if you like, I've become known for, and I've gone, as Joan says, in terms of keynotes and lecture tours in different universities around the world. And those ideas are beginning to be taken up, and so that theses, and I've just examined 2 from South Africa, that have embodied that idea in terms of their knowledge creation. So that's what I was hoping that I could connect with you today, just to see whether these ideas resonate with your own passions. Because if they do, they will have implications for your contribution to research at Liverpool Hope University. Because my claim will be that if you will bring your embodied knowledge, the knowledge that is actually in this room, in who you are and what you do, you will enhance the research status of the university. And what I want to focus on are statements that actually, it was Barbara Tetrick that actually helped to communicate and make these public in terms of the vision and purpose of the Faculty of Education. And I just want to point to this language, because I don't think that it's a language that you will have brought into your research. And I doubt if anybody's got their doctorate from actually showing to the university that actually it's the values of love and hope which are motivating values and therefore explanatory principles in why you are doing what you are doing. To put forward love as an explanatory principle in an academic text is not only not usual, it's often frowned upon in relation to being subjective, not really objective, it's not really legitimate academically. And what I want to do is to try to show you where the theses and the doctoral theses have already been legitimated, embodying love as a principle, not just love, but other values as well. But if you just look at this language that is now within the strategic map for the 2010 and 11 Faculty of Education. Now here you have the guiding vision orientation of the faculty is to develop education thought and practices which promote education as a humanising influence on each person and on society, locally, nationally and internationally. Now one of the points that I want to strongly emphasise is that we could make ourselves accountable to this vision. We could produce our own explanations of how we are actually attempting to live out this value of humanising influence. What is it to have a humanising influence on each person and especially on society, locally, nationally and internationally? And I'll try and show you where you can access evidence about where this is being done. But the one idea that I want to focus on comes from the purpose. Now, if you look at your purpose and my purpose to contribute to the development of knowledge and understanding in all fields of education, characterising all work with values arising from hope and love. Now, just think for a moment how many times you have brought into your research papers and your research accounts, your doctoral work, your master's work, the explanatory principles of values arising from hope and love. I doubt if there's anybody, including myself, that has included both of those in their doctorates or their research publications. I have never brought both hope and love into my research presentations. But I have in terms of love, and I want to focus on some of the implications of bringing the energy of a loving relationship and a loving dynamic into your research. But I also want to say that in relation to Liverpool Hope University, one of the great distinguishing features that we could help, I think, the university to develop is by putting hope with love in terms of these values of the Faculty of Education that arise from hope and love. Now, could I just ask, am I clear there? Because it seems to me that this is quite a radical suggestion for you in terms of making a research focus, your own practice, your own explanatory principles, where you're willing to make public your understanding of what it is that is motivating you in terms of love and hope. And I would thought, with Andrew in the audience in terms of some of the spiritual communications that take place in the university, this is not a strange thing to embrace. This is one of the universities with its spiritual ground that should find it easier than almost any other to acknowledge the importance of love and hope within the research context, but as explanatory principles. Now this is the difference, and I want to show you now where you can access evidence of how this is being done in terms of inquiries that are grounded in what is known as action research, which is where individuals research their own practice as they try to live their values as fully as they can within what they're doing. Now what I usually do in terms of my public addresses is just to give anybody in the audience the opportunity to say, if they've actually come with any kind of questions that they themselves would like answering during the time that we've got together, because I shall finish promptly at 1:45. But in my experience, it's often if you have come with questions or interests or something that has captivated your imagination, that you want to be tackled and you'd like to have some consideration given to, that is often the most lasting influence from one of my talks. So what I'll do is I'll pause before I go on to show you how I use the internet and the evidence that will be flowing through this, which is an electronic portal. It just looks like words on pages of text, but I want to show you how I use the internet and have the information and evidence which is literally flowing all the way around the room and globally that can be accessed, as you know, with the wireless and the laptop. But before I do that, I'm just curious, has anybody actually come with anything that is of interest to them in the kind of talk or the kind of exploration that we could engage in?
Jack, is it possible to have hope and love? Alan, is it possible to have hope and love within the hard science of quantitative research?
One of the problems of getting hope and love into the quantification is the nature of data. Because if you quantify, in one sense you've got to measure. So if you measure, the data, if you're going to be the hard sciences, need to be integral or ratio data. Now once you go in for that kind of data, and what it means is that you can categorize something, it's not just nominal or ordinal. You can actually put it into categories, you can order the categories, and then look at the distance between the intervals and make some statement that you know that 1 and 2 is the same as 2 and 3, 3 and 4. Now love and hope isn't literally of that quality. It is very different. It would be a category mistake for me to try to give you 9 out of 10 for your loving influence.
It's Cameron's notion about quantifying happiness, isn't it? It's that sort of, how do you do it?
Exactly. Now, because I was literally a positivist scientist when I started with the first few joint honours in physics and chemistry, I had to go through quite a traumatic experience in terms of my educational research to try to get in touch with what do I mean by values. And that's how I studied philosophy with Peters and Hurst in the late 60s about ethics in education. And there was no way that I could quantify justice in terms of a scale. But what I can do is make the unreasonable doubt. So it's like the evidence you bring in a court of law with the data that I'll try and show you the evidence for my claims, that I think I can show you that I am exploring the influence of a loving dynamic energy. You'll see it, I think, on some videotapes I'll show you how to access. I'll be able to point to those and build a visual narrative around an explanation of what I do, which actually is literally intransigent to categorization of that kind of quantification. But that's not to say you don't and can't use quantitative approaches. Like one of my PhD students used data from a test in mathematics, he was the head of maths and science, to try to see how his pupils were doing, and then integrated that data within his account. But his question was, how does love enable justice to see rightly, was of this kind of living narrative form, which was beyond reasonable doubt in terms of the examiners of how they could see him living his values of love and justice. Is there anything else that you feel, I just like to raise this before I start, because I often find that it's that kind of engagement which is genuinely educative. Is there anything else that you feel?
Yeah. I'd just like to say I'm a theologian, so I do quite a lot of thinking about love and hope. So those are working materials for me. So those notions will appear in some of my research work. Connecting it with education isn't the sort of thing I'm doing yet.
Yeah. And if you like, sorry, you want to?
I'm interested in the word love because I'm a teacher, an advisory teacher, and talking to practitioners, it is a word that they use quite naturally about their work, and that they love what they're doing, that they love the children, that the changes they want to make are because born out of this loving concern for the children, and to make a difference for those children. So there is a connection, but it's how to bring that into a workable way.
It is, and to research that. So I do like very much what you were saying about love and hope in education. One of the key issues I think we face is how do we communicate with meanings that really can be understood the influence of love and hope as we literally build explanations of our influence in the learning of others. So if you take it just in the here and now. Now, I love what I do, and the fact that Sue invited me into this space has given me the opportunity to actually express with an energy that I'm hoping that you can sense is part of me doing what I really love doing. The reason I love to do what I do is that if I'm with people, many of whom are really good educators, what I'm desperate to do is to bring that embodied knowledge into the world and spread the influence more widely. I hope I'm making sense there, because as you said, that love and hope, what I would really, and again, love to do is to see how we can get an account of your embodied knowledge with your students and the influence of that spread so that influence can be actually worked on in other places in the world. This is what I try to do, to spread the influence of love and hope. Now, as I'm speaking to you, Maria is actually videotaping the presentation. And what I've often done is to put clips onto YouTube, where I then do a visual narrative to show what I'm meaning by love and the expression of hope. And I build it into my explanations of influence. But the reason that I've got a bedrock of willingness to use love is because a chief technician I worked with at the university called Martin Dawson, University of Bath, I've worked with him 20 years. And he died in his early 50s. This is about 2002, 2003. And I went to see him on the Friday before he died on the Sunday. And I've never forgotten the vital life in him as our last words that he said. And I shall never forget, although he was dying, he'd gone on the Sunday, his words were, "Jack, give my love to the department. Give my love to the department." Now, I have a bedrock of certainty in what Martin actually meant in terms of that loving expression of humanity which he brought in every day to his workplace. So I believe that everybody here will actually comprehend in their own meanings why they also value love and hope in terms of what they do. Are you okay if I go on and just show you now where I think you can access some of the evidence from doctorates, from keynotes around the world, where people are taking up these ideas to research their own practice and bring their explanations of their influence into the public domain as part of their research writings. But what I'd like to do is to focus in on this acknowledging a loving dynamic energy. That feels to me to be central. Now we've also got this idea of recognising living contradictions, because am I right in saying, and please challenge me if this is not true, that every one of you recognise that you're living contradictions in the sense that you're very aware of the values, whether it's compassion, justice, hope, your passion for freedom, that when you look at the life you are living in the context of the moment, that some of these values are not being lived as fully as they could be. That creates a tension where your imaginations start to work about what could you do better. You know, I think that Bart, when he actually created the strategic map for the Faculty of Education, was actually tense because he hadn't yet managed to explicate the real grounding of the values and also the sense of love and hope that he wanted the faculty to express. And then these came out within the strategic map. So it was an imagination of what could be better, it was then the act, and now we'll evaluate over the next year or so what it means to explore the implications of living those values. But it comes out of the how do I improve my practice? The I, for me, is a living contradiction, because we hold values, whether it's love and hope, passion, justice, that we really want to see in the world, but those aren't lived as fully as they could, so that we are existing as living contradictions. Now, you can access, I'll just show you where you can actually access the talk. What I usually do is, I usually put talks on the internet on this page, actionresearch.net. And if you can treat this as an electronic portal, which can bring to you resources from all the way around the world that is now flowing into this room, and you can access wherever you are with your laptops. Now, what I've done is, on the What's New section, to put in the notes for this presentation. And you'll see that in these notes, I've just emphasised this idea of a living contradiction. The way I've done it is just to focus on something which really attracted me in Bali. This signpost in Bali shows 5 religious buildings which are all side by side. Now, I don't know if you know this story, but for Bali to belong to Indonesia, it had to be seen to be monotheistic, because Indonesia would only allow parts of it to belong to Indonesia if it was monotheistic. Now, in Balinese Hinduism, there were quite a number of gods. And what they did was to elevate one of them, Sanghiwangi, to the priority, number 1 god. And to emphasise this, they built these temples. And they're all together, and it just has a feeling when you're in this huge courtyard of something of bringing together and sharing different spiritual histories, cultures, and backgrounds. And I really like this in Bali. Yet, in relation to something which is only 3 miles away from that, there is a place called Jimbaran Beach. And this was a photograph, and I didn't know it was being taken. I was in the foreground of this, and it was these 2 people. My face was facing the camera, and I saw the picture, and these 2 were just spontaneously giving their images. They were alive, really vital. So this was at the Managa Beach Cafe at the 1st of September. Now, what I want to show you is that, because 1st of October 2005, on this spot where they were sitting, that was the bombing in Bali, where, you know, there were 3 sites, 20 people killed. They would have been killed if they had been sitting in that place just expressing that human pleasure of being alive and in communication with others. So that's just part of this recognition that we're all within a social context in which we're living contradictions. And also yourselves, you know, I think the context here, you know, it's going to be quite difficult economically. You know, here am I talking about living the values of love and hope, and yet all around the country, people are being subjected to economic pressures which can get in the way of living these values as fully as you can. So this is the point I want to stress about all of us being living contradictions. Now, what I've done for you is I've taken this idea of a vision, spreading humanising influences locally. Now, put in this presentation our local influence through this Centre for the Child and Family. I do hope you access these, because just with a click you can actually bring up some of the work that's been done. You can actually, if you wish, bring up, for example, Joan's thesis. There it is. You can get the whole of her doctoral thesis, and you'll see, you won't be able to read this, but I'll just read it out in terms of this idea of generating a living theory which offers spiritual resilience, gained through connection with a loving dynamic energy as an original standard of judgment. So you can just see, I hope, that locally you're actually able to draw evidence from work that is already going on in terms of this one here. If you like, I'll just allow this, but this is the constitution of the Centre for the Child and Family, which actually sets out in a most radical way some of the things I've been talking about in terms of a collaborative inquiry. And I hope today you feel the energy that, for example, at the back of the room, there are members of the practitioner researcher group of the Centre for the Child and Family, and they've come up from Bath. Nigel Harrison, Director of the Education and Inclusion Service. There's Chris Jones, who's also working in that service. And we've got Marie Huxtable there doing her doctorate as a senior educational psychologist. Marie's on camera. And there's a sense of belonging together as we research these issues from within the Centre for the Child and Family. But those are our, if you like, our local influences, and there are quite a number of those which you can just access by clicking on. This is why I want to emphasise this as an electronic portal which is bringing you the evidence that you can access at your leisure. And I do hope you will go into actionresearch.net and access it. You'll see Joan presenting at a keynote symposium in Beer in September. You can also access where Bart was introducing it. Tanya was there. There was Linda Rush. There was Bernie. There were others. And they were giving us a keynote symposium at the most influential research seminar in this country, the conference. So you'll be able to access the YouTube, the videos of that. Now, I've been myself, I did a keynote at Edge Hill University for the 125-year celebrations. I'll be there as a visiting professor if I give these kind of talks, and you'll see that I'm making similar points there at Edge Hill. Marie Huxtable, who's on the camera, Marie has actually done something which is quite remarkable in terms of building what is called a living learning site, which children and teachers are being encouraged to put up their stories and share them and respond to. So this is an interactive site called Living Learning, which again locally is now really becoming influential in people sharing their ideas, responding together and building a community. So these are the local ones within Bath and Liverpool that we've been working on. Now, if I just look nationally, this is something that I was really delighted to videotape and put on the web. And it was the keynote with Bart and Linda and Tanya and Deirdre, Bernie and Tim and Anne. And it was on professional learning and new professionalism. You can access the papers and the video of the whole presentation from here. Now, why I think this was really very significant is that the year before that, Marie, myself, Jean McNiff and others had had a keynote symposium. And the fact that in 2 consecutive years, members of the Liverpool Hope University have been participating in these keynote seminars, and will be putting in proposals to meet the 24th of January deadline for next September, just to keep these dialogues going in terms of the influence of our research here. explicitly bringing those values of love and hope, compassion and justice, freedom and care into the academic community as literally academic standards of judgment. And this is the key transformation that I'm suggesting is now made in terms of the nature of educational knowledge. Some of you are already participating in the international research communities. I put up the contributions that the American Education Research Association, these were another one at the University of San Diego last year, a keynote on personal growth and professional development. South Africa, you'll see that I'm already bringing some of these ideas into at least 4 South African universities, and there was also in Mozambique this last year, putting forward these ideas, how do I improve what I'm doing, generate my living educational theory. So that is just the local, the national, and the international. Now, if I just stress that making public your knowledge base, the embodied knowledge in this room, is really crucial. At the moment, I'm bringing through this electronic portal all the resources and evidence that you can access at home, in your office, and it's coming this way. Now, some of you have started to come this way as well, putting your accounts of your research and knowledge creation onto the web so it can be shared and go this way. And that's the kind of neutrality that I'm actually trying to generate. And one of the ways I'm doing it is through the referee journal, the Educational Journal of Living Theories. I'll just make this point and then I'll just pause again. Now, the Educational Journal of Living Theories is an e-journal which the latest version, the latest issue, contains this foreword by Margaret Farron at Dublin City University. And these contributions, and the one that I'd really like you to read at some point is this one by Anke Jaus. She wrote it about her experiences in East Germany when she tried to escape through the wall and was captured. And there was torture involved with her and her husband. She was then exchanged for somebody in the West. But it actually destroyed the family relationships because Anke's sister stayed in the East and she really felt betrayed by Anke going to the West. And this narrative is a really very sensitive and quite harrowing at times life history of the attempt to re-establish a loving and hopeful relationship with the family, and she does it through an action research process. But this is something that you can internationally contribute to in terms of this educational journey of living theories. And this fits with the 4th point that I was raising, which is contributing to the development of knowledge and understanding in all fields of education, characterising all work with values arising from love and hope. Now, I'll just pause again just to see, before I just show you how you can get into these, which are some of the 30 doctrines. They aren't all on here, but about 20 odd of them are on here. They've been successfully submitted, certainly over the last 15 years, in terms of living theory. Some from other universities. But before I do that, let me just pause and just say, is there anything else that you feel that you'd just like to raise? Because often I find, as I say, that it's responses from you, and they're making a response to that, which is often the most educative part of an interactive session. So, is there anything that you feel that you would like just to raise from what I've just been saying, or not?
The notion of process in terms of love and hope. I love everybody, I hope for everybody, but you also, or do you also, have to have a receiver for that to be able for it to be of merit. I suppose it comes back to the classic philosophy question of the tree falling in the forest, and you need someone to hear it for it actually to have fallen. It's that sort of notion.
Yeah, what I find is that I have 3 elements to creating a living theory. There's one where I don't think you need, if you like, almost anyone else in terms of that sense of the educational influence you have within yourself for living your values as fully as you can. So you'll see that quite a lot of these accounts, and I'll show you how to access these, are focused on that sense of the educator as a self-educator. The idea that you're trying to live as fully as you can values of love and hope, or compassion and justice and freedom, in contexts where there are living contradictions. So using the action inquiry process, you can clarify the meanings of your values as they emerge in practice.
I think that's the important point, is the notion of the reflection of your values in others. and you're judging and ordering of, you said before about some people feel that they are maybe not living them to the full.
Yeah.
You judge that in others. The difficulty there, Malcolm, is in others' interpretation of those two conceptual themes of hope and love.
No, and I agree, because if you go into the second and third element of a living theory, the second one is, how do you explain your educational influence with another? The third element is, how do you explain your educational influence in the social formation in which you're living and working? So you have those three interrelated processes at work. Now, when it comes to, for example, judging my educational influence, where I'll show you how to access this particular one, which I do think will help, with an answer to your question. If you took this living theory section, and remember, as I said, all available for you freely, and each researcher has just said, yes, you can make these freely available. This one here, I am because we are, a never-ending story. The emergence of a living theory of inclusional and responsive practice. Now, Marion was advising the last government in terms of issues of theatre and development and in relation to mental health. Now, I can say that I've had an influence educationally with Marion. I can show you the evidence base for that claim. But it's not that I have causally affected Marion. It's like here now. Anything that you take from what I'm saying is mediated through your creativity, your imagination. I can't claim to have educated you. But I might claim, if you show that some of the ideas are meaning something to you, after having that reflection and your use of your imagination, that you've actually integrated some of those insights in your own work, I can then legitimately, I think, claim to have had an educational influence. But it's mediated all the time by your creativity and uniqueness.
And that's what I'm agreeing wholeheartedly with what you're saying. The issue is that when you translate across into comparative fields, and the ontology of words brings different values and visions within an ontological scheme for a word, such as hope and love in different cultures. And then we begin to interpret through our own ontology. And that's, I think, is an interesting area for an interpretation of words.
No, it is. I mean, my whole research is grounded in that insight. That's why I'm saying that each individual's living theory is actually unique, exactly because of that. Now, Marion, she brought the value of a compassion. It was a passion for compassion. Now, until Marion, and supervising Marion, I had never used a notion of compassion in my own research. So Marion influenced me in actually starting to embrace the notion of compassion. But Marion's ontological understandings of the values emerging from love and hope were unique to her. And she brought passion for compassion as one of those values, unique to her.
It's a great thing to study. I mean, compassion, Hobbes, and the notion of that interpreted into Hindu culture is totally different to a Western ontology. It doesn't translate very well as a negative.
Yeah. You see, this is where I don't think you translate. I don't think that we should be, if you like, almost like translating. I think the Japanese have got a concept of bar. Okay, so it's difficult to communicate in English what they mean by this, but it means being very aware of the place and space within which you're actually living and relating. The Chinese, where I've been working with the Chinese, and we've got the first centre for action research. The government had to agree to set up this Centre for Educational Action Research in China, and it was one of my former PhD students that actually was very influential in that. They have a very different understanding ontologically of relationship. So we've built in some of those in terms of the theses. South Africa, the notion of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Now that's a glib English translation. You've actually got to work with the South African groups and allow them, in terms of, for example, the Zulu language, which we are doing at the moment in Durham University, to really try to communicate to you what is the meaning of an Ubuntu way of being. So I think that insight is one of the most important of seeing that everyone in this room can actually generate your own unique inquiry and explanation, recognising that difference in the meaning of words, especially across cultures. So is there anything else before I just show you how to access these, both the master's and the doctoral thesis, and then I'll finish. But just anything else? But I love that insight. That's vital. Anything else? Do you know, it's strange, isn't it? Because, your faces, if you could see them from where I see them, honestly. No. When you talk individually, there's a laughter, there's a humour, there's an energy. And I know that as soon as you get into this context, yeah, with the control. And it's really something to try to resist, because I really enjoy this position. Do you know? But it's very dangerous. Very dangerous. Yeah. But this is what I love that I hope that I'm bringing to you in terms of these doctoral theses. If you look at some of them, what I loved about that point there, for example, Eden Charles was advising the government on race relations. And Eden, you look at this question: how can I bring Ubuntu as a living standard of judgment into the academy, moving beyond decolonisation through societal re-identification and guiltless recognition? Now, that was a very, very powerful thesis, showing how his identification with the South African and the African notion of Ubuntu as a much more collegial and community way of being could actually inform race relations in this country. He was advising, again, like Marion, the last Labour government. Now, I'll just point, for example, to Chris Jones at the back there. Chris's dissertation, this was a master's dissertation, and she's now just going for her doctoral proposal. How do I improve my practice as an inclusion officer working in a children's service? Now, if you go into Chris's dissertation, you'll just see that she uses some wonderful multimedia work. And I'll just bring this up just to show you one of the techniques I use to communicate the idea of these values. So where I'm using a lot of words, actually to communicate the meanings of your embodied values, the love and the energy which you live with and actually communicate to other people with, I've been claiming that you need to use visual representations. And Chris's dissertation was the first multimedia living theory dissertation to be legitimated at Bath Spa University. This was 2009. And I really do hope you have a look at it, because it does break new ground in terms of the use of video and visual narrative in communicating some of this energy and the values in relation to inclusion. Now, I don't really want to show you Chris speaking, because although she's very clear and articulate, I just want you to watch. Okay? Now, I think the energy is unmistakable, is it not? Yeah? That movement and the passion that is driving Chris, that when you listen to this one, it is about how at the age of, I think it was 6, was that right, Chris? It was, I think, in the primary school, where Chris was actually leaning against a wall and the teacher was literally telling her off in a very, very aggressive way. And in this clip, Chris is describing that, and she says, the mortification I felt. Okay, and the embodied knowledge of this mortification is what Chris then says, this is what made me there and then to decide to become a teacher so that I could do it better. Now, it's unmistakable, that authenticity of this is why I decided, but it carries the energy with that negativity of the feeling of, oh, I was humiliated, I was mortified, and then it's, I can do this better. But can you feel, it's that feeling of the energy that's there with Chris. And it's also the same with Nigel. Nigel's doing his doctorate, and Nigel's here in a large room in Bath in the Guild Hall. And what we're doing at the moment is just analysing just some of Nigel, where he's actually talking about his understanding of inclusion. Now, I'll just... It's not who they are and what they bring. Inclusion is the process of taking the necessary... Let me just see if I can put the volume up a little better. To develop socially, to learn and to enjoy in life. In Bath and North East Somerset, we recognise and value the uniqueness of every young person. All young people have the right to be accepted, to achieve and to be valued by the contribution they make. As you will appreciate, there is no absolute end to being inclusive. Rather, it is a process of constantly examining and changing our thoughts, feelings and behaviours. Now, if you see Nigel and Chris as colleagues, Nigel established a space which encouraged Chris to produce her dissertation. It was part of the creative space that Nigel, as manager and leader, created, and that was partially influential in the way in which Chris was able to create that highly original dissertation. Nigel is now looking at some of the videotapes of his own practice, and one at Bira, this was about 3 years ago, when in a seminar on loving relationships he acknowledged his love for what he does. So Nigel is now bringing that embodied knowledge, the energy and the values, through the analysis of visual narrative into his doctoral inquiry. But that notion of inclusion, I imagine that it's one that you all share within this university, but know how difficult it is to live these values and these qualities continuously. But it's this that I'm hoping that some of you, just a few of you, may be attracted to come and share in the collaborative inquiry that certainly Joan has been promoting in the Centre for the Child and Family, and now we've got a practitioner researcher group that is actually working in this way. You've got an enormous amount of evidence now from different parts of the world that you can access, literally at that click of the button, in terms of what you could see in terms of the Action Research website. And on this right-hand column, you'll see quite a lot of the presentations from different parts of the world. On this one is the evidence from the doctoral students, and also the ones I really enjoy as well is this one here on the Master Educator. If you go into there, you'll find a whole lot of Masters Educators writings from the teacher researchers who are bringing those values into their Master's work. So what I want to do is, if you like, just to pause now, because we've only got 1 minute left, and I'm just curious if there's anything else that you're feeling, okay, I'd just like to wrap up this before we finish. So is there anything else? Or have I shocked you again into silence? This is not the best way to end the session. Is there anything from you that you're feeling, okay? Nothing at all. No.
Stunned silence.
Stunned silence, that's right. Well, let me just say thanks once again, because just to share these ideas, you can imagine, my excitement, it's still going strong after that 40 years engagement. And what particularly delights me is the ability to bring all these resources to you. And just with a click, on the actionresearch.net, you can access these. You can get into Chris's dissertation, the multimedia work, and have a look at its significance, which I really do hope you do. And then with Joan, actually possibly keep a conversation going in terms of living these values more fully. So many, many thanks indeed for letting me share these ideas with you. Thank you.
Thank you.